Perfect.
So
Let's
first,
start.
yeah. So first, can we have a check of all the ingredients? I'll share with you what all I have. So I have whole wheat flour. So today in the book, if you see, I've shared sugar. I made it with sugar. But yesterday I thought, let me try it with jaggery, because in this book, whatever recipe I've shared, you can alternate with the flours of your choice. Again, with the sugar, it's not just white sugar. You can substitute it with jaggery. You can substitute it with brown sugar. It works great. So today I'm going to use jaggery instead of sugar. If you had kept sugar ready, you can use sugar, or if you have jaggery at home, jaggery powder, you can use jaggery, or if you have brown sugar, you can use that also. So I've taken 1 cup of whole. So this is going to be a guilt-free snack for us. Hot, we can have it along with chai, and it's Christmas Eve, so you can enjoy it today, tomorrow for your Christmas. Okay, so this is whole wheat flour. I've taken 1 cup. I've taken half cup of jaggery powder. Okay, and then along with that, I'm going to add baking powder, and then I'm going to add a pinch of salt. Okay, so these are the dry flour ingredients. And for the wet ingredients, you need milk. So if you're going to get it from your fridge, you can get it right now. If it's ready, then it's fine. So here, this is half cup of milk. You will need. Then you will need ghee. So again, we are not using butter, but feel free if you don't have ghee at home. You want to use butter, you can use butter. So, or if you want to use oil, you can use oil of your choice. Any flavorless oil will work great. I'm using ghee. And then have some little extra milk along, just in case it becomes thicker, the dough becomes thicker. We have little milk along, so that we can just mix and make the dough. So that's about it. And spices. So I have nutmeg, I have cardamom, and I have 1 clove. I'm going to grate the nutmeg, and I'm going to use cardamom powder, and I'm going to powder fresh clove. Okay, these are the spices that are going to go into the recipe. So I think that's about it. And I have these dry fruits. Again, this is your choice. Whatever you want to use, you can use. But the main thing is dates, because this is Khajur rock buns. That is the dates, right? So I've got 5-6 dates. I've chopped them. I've got walnuts. I've chopped them. Some cashew nuts, some almonds and pistachios. Again, I've chopped them. And chironji, this is optional. If you have, you can use this. Otherwise, it's fine. And I've just kept some tutti frutti outside just for the garnish, because it's Christmas Eve. So I've got some tutti frutti. This is optional. If you want, we can use just pistachios on top. So this is for garnish. Okay, that's about it. So let's start mixing then. Anything unclear or any doubts on anything, please feel free. Just stop me. Yeah. And I'll be happy to.
I have a question. So all your measures, when you say 1 cup and all, you are talking about 200 ml, right?
Yeah. I'll show you what measurements I use. I use this one. This is my standard measuring, cups. This is 250 ml. 250 ml cups.
Okay. So I got some measures, so I have just taken it as for that, because some recipes, people just say like take it based on this and that. I just wanted to make sure that we are measuring it accurately. Okay.
See, if you don't have, usually this is a tip I like to share any recipe. If it's written 1 cup, and if you're using any cup, say a katori you're using from your home, if you're using this as 1 cup, for the entire recipe, use this. Measure half cup, right. Means in this cup itself you use half. In this cup itself you use 1/4.
Cool.
Even then it works.
Cool. And the other thing is like I'm using palm sugar, so I hope that is fine.
Yeah, great.
It should be good.
Great.
Yes. Cool. So just a small word. I think palm sugar is less sweeter than jaggery or brown sugar or white sugar. So you might want to appropriately adjust. But if the intent is to have it slightly less sweet, I think that it's perfectly fine.
I wanted a little caramelly and little less sugar.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Yes. You can just add extra dates maybe, or for the extra sweetness.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Ashok, why is the palm sugar less sugary or less sweet?
I mean,
it has less concentration, I mean, of sugar, right? It's made depending on whether you're using coconut sugar or if you're using the from the actual palm tree itself, right? Your sugar cane is the most dense source of sugar. So that's why we tend to make sugar from sugarcane, because you can make like 100% sucrose from sugarcane, right? Whereas your palm sugars and others are not 100% sucrose. They tend to be weaker, milder sugars. End of the day, they're all sugar for you, but they tend to have other flavors other than just the pure sweetness. So your coconut palm sugar will have a slight hints of coconut flavors, and your jaggery, on the other hand, is basically is unprocessed. That's the difference, right? So it is it's therefore a combination of molasses, fructose, glucose, and a bit of sucrose. So that's why it has the most complex flavor. Whereas white sugar is just sucrose, which is the sweetest kind of sugar that we know. I mean, in the sense that fructose is the sweetest sugar, which is what fruits have, but sucrose is the most sort of even tasting, and that's what we are sort of used to right now.
Right. And one more thing I forgot. You can have if you have vanilla essence or extract, you can use that for flavoring. So I'm going to use a little bit. So shall we start now? Yeah, ready to go?
yes, please, Uma, please go ahead.
Yeah. So to the flour, I'm going to add jaggery, pinch of salt. Then I'm going to add the baking powder. So a teaspoon of baking powder I'm adding.
In case anyone has a confusion between baking powder and baking soda, they are very different things. Baking powder is baking soda already mixed with an acid, so that it's ready to go. As soon as you start adding any kind of liquid, it's already starting to form sort of bubbles and carbon dioxide, right? Baking soda requires an acid, which is why you'll either use this in recipes where you'll use either a yogurt or something like that. So,
or lemon or
lime juice or any other kind of acid. Yeah.
True. So just mix everything together. You can use a fork and mix. I've kept it inside the drawer, I'm not able to take, so I'm using a spoon. But generally, when you're mixing the flours, use a fork and mix so that everything is mixed well. That's it. Now we're going to add all the dry fruits. Whichever you have chopped and kept, you can use. So I am adding dates, chopped dates.
So one of the reasons we add salt, even when making sweet items, is the fact that salt is actually an amplifier of all other flavors, particularly sweet, and also amplifies spice flavors. So since you are going to be using rich flavors like nutmeg and so on, salt actually amplifies that. You can actually do this experiment at home. Try eating cardamom just like that versus cardamom with a pinch of salt. And you will find that the second one, it actually smells more strongly of cardamom. Because the salt actually amplifies.
Yeah, so you can mix all your dry fruits. So our dry mix is ready. So our dry mix is ready. Okay, now we are going to do our wet mix. We're going to get our milk. And in our milk, we are going to add ghee. This is room temperature ghee. Okay, so I've added ghee and now I'm going to add my vanilla extract.
So while she does that, one of the reasons we add any kind of fat, especially when baking cookies of any kind like this, right? As opposed, and we add fair bit of fat. It could be butter, it could be oil, it could be ghee in this case, right? Is to actually prevent too much of a formation of gluten in the atta or in the flour that you're using. Because what you don't want is chewiness. You don't want ultra chewiness. You want it to be flaky. You want it to be softer in the mouth. And that is exactly why fats are added. It's a general science rule you can, right? So if you add water to flour, you'll get chewiness. If you add fats to flour, you'll get flakiness, right? So that's why a croissant is basically layers of butter and flour sort of mixed with each other, right? So in this case, we're using ghee, but that's the general principle. Yeah.
So mix it up well. So our wet mix is ready. Here in the dry mix, I haven't added the flavors. So let's add the flavors to this, the spices. So I'm going to add the cardamom powder.
So Uma, somebody was asking how much ghee have you put in? Somebody just asked
2 teaspoons. This is, like I said, it's a very guilt-free recipe. So just 2 teaspoons of ghee. That's it. Because ghee gives the best taste. Because this recipe is inspired from the Parsi Kajurni Ghari. It's like a cookie which they make in Parsi cuisine with mashed and cooked dates stuffed inside and baked. And rock buns are the it's neither a cake nor a cookie. It's in between. So this is a combination of both the flavors of the Parsi Kajurni Ghari recipe and the way it's baked, the rock buns. So it's a mix of both. So this is like a guilt-free, healthy dessert. And our since it's Parsi recipe and our Indian flavors are there, I think ghee really complements. It's healthy, and I think Ashok will tell us how good ghee is for our health.
Yeah, so I'm not a nutritionist, but in any case, so in general, ghee and butter are obviously, I think, the two of the most flavorful fats that you can find. Although they have a ton of saturated fat in them, the other flavor molecules that they have is just so quintessentially sort of, they define that style of cooking. So which is why, you associate, say, North Indian cooking with a ghee, and you kind of associate a French cooking with, say, butter, right? I think it's just that they bring out those flavors fantastically.
Yeah, so I just pounded the clove and added it. And now I'm going to grate nutmeg, because nutmeg, when you grate and add fresh, the flavor is really good. So just a pinch of it is enough, because it's quite strong. So just a pinch of it, but it's fresh, so I can already smell it. It's like really.
Nutmeg is a very, very strong spice. But again, remember, I think most spices are very, very volatile, right? And the word volatile essentially means that it's losing its aroma to the air. It's also getting oxidized. So, which is why in general, it's always a great idea to buy spices whole and then sort of roast them and grate them only when you need them, or powder them only when you need them, because that's when you get the maximum amount of flavor.
Correct. Even when I make biryani or pulao, if I'm roasting fresh, using fresh garam masala, freshly roasted and ground, that biryani taste is completely different from the stored one. Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. So now I'm adding the wet ingredients to the dry ingredients, and just
this is an important point, because baking powder starts reacting with liquid as soon as it meets it, which is why you keep these separate and you mix them only right at the end, just before you're about to bake.
Yes, it's the most important thing. Yeah. So here what I'm doing is I'm adding little more milk if it's required, because I've generously added the dry fruits today. I've not followed the recipe exactly, because it's Christmas and I wanted it to be really rich, so I've added more dry fruits. So you see your consistency. You mix your batter right now. We are looking at a sticky consistency. It should not be pouring consistency like a cake, and it's not going to be very thick like a cookie. It's going to be very sticky dough. So you mix your dough and then you decide whether you want to add more milk. So I have kept little more milk. I'm going to add milk. Just a tablespoon of milk. This is only if it's required. So you mix it together. See, it's all come together beautifully. hope you're able to see it. So you're having a sticky dough. So that's about it. Our rock buns dough is ready for us to place in our baking sheets. Let's preheat our ovens to 220 degrees for 10 minutes. So I'm just preheating it. Since this is a school recipe, the whole point is to get the entire cooking done within 15 to 20 minutes. So just prep this, getting the dough ready is going to be 10 minutes. Preheating at the same time, and then baking is going to be another 10-12 minutes. So the entire dish is ready within 30 minutes. It's cooled down also, and you're ready to pack it in the lunchbox. So that's the main idea.
And I think for people wondering, what's the magic of, how you pick a oven temperature? Should it be, how come some recipes will say 190 and some will say 220 and so on, right? So in general, the lower the temperature, the more amount of time you will need, right? So if you're doing 190, then you'll need to bake for longer, right? Now, also remember that the longer you bake something, the more drier it will become, right? So it's a question of, if you're making a cake, for instance, the batter is going to be really, really wet. It's going to have a lot more water in it. So it's always better to bake at a lower temperature for a longer period of time so that it loses enough water so that you get that final consistency. A cookie like this, on the other hand, is not a very wet batter. If you bake at a lower temperature for a longer period of time, you're going to end up with something that's really, really rock hard, right? And so that's the reason you use a higher temperature. So.
Yeah, I've experienced that, Ashok. Cookie, but turning both the sides. Either it's too soft or it's too hard.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's say I've lined a baking tray. Either you can use a parchment paper, you can use a butter paper. If you don't have both, you can use foil, whichever you have at home, whichever is available. Just line your baking tray. Okay, now if you have an ice cream scoop, then you can use that, or you can just simply use a spoon. I'm going to just use a spoon. Excuse me. So I'm just going to spoon it, and I'm just going to spoon it this way. That's it. So give some space between the buns. If you have an ice cream scoop, if you might want to, use that. But again, the baking temperature will differ because the density of the batter will differ. So when you use a spoon, it's thinner. So you can just spoon your batter. If you have any clarifications, any doubt or anything, just let me know. I hope all your batter has come together just the way mine is.
Ashok, Fenny has a question for you.
Sure.
She's asking, does baking powder contain a chemical component?
Okay, so all food is chemicals. It's merely a question of whether we prefer those or we like those or not. We are all ultimately chemicals in that sense. But I get your question about whether the artificiality or the syntheticness of the whole thing. Baking powder is essentially baking soda plus an acid, like either a tartaric acid or citric acid. Both of these acids are actually quite natural. Citric acid is found in lime juice. Tartaric acid is what you get in grape, right? And in apples as well, right? So these are commonly known culinary acids in dry form mixed with, sodium bicarbonate, which is a base. So when you add water, all of these react to produce carbon dioxide and water. So it's perfectly safe if that's the question. Yes.
So I have spooned my rock buns. I have done it. It's as simple as this. You can just drop it, just spoon it. That's it. And now garnish is up to you. If you want, you can garnish. So I'm just garnishing some with pistas, finely powdered pistas and walnuts. And some with tutti frutti I'm using just for the Christmas bit. So that's it. We are ready to go into the oven. Once my oven is going to be ready, then I'm just going to keep it in my oven. And I baked one batch yesterday, so this is how it's going to look. Absolutely soft and fluffy inside. Ready to eat. Yum. So we are going to have this in the end. So I'm just going to wait for my oven to heat. So Krish, I have a question for you. Whenever I bake a recipe with jaggery, for example, the same rock buns, when I make with sugar, the shelf life is longer. Like for example, if I make this, then up to 7 days, my rock buns are fresh.
Yep.
And they don't, spoil.
Yes.
Whereas when I make it with jaggery, I find that the shelf life is lesser. Why is it so?
You see, jaggery is actually has a ton of other organic material in it, right? So it's unprocessed sugar, right? So jaggery is actually a mix of molasses, which is actually what spoils ultimately with time, right? So which is still bits of the sort of sugarcane pulp that is still there, right? And then you have some kind of fructose is there. Then you have pure glucose, and then you have some sucrose, right? And so it's just that when you process all of it and just make pure sucrose, right? Pure cane sugar is very, very long lasting. Because most bacteria and most other things, although you would think that sugar is food for all of these things, but no, they cannot grow in 100% pure sugar. Jaggery, on the other hand, is not. And so it will attract microorganisms. It will spoil. So that's essentially why using jaggery reduces the shelf life of any baked good. But it will improve its taste because it has a more complex flavor. Yes.
I see even in the chicky which we get now in Delhi, here it's winter and we get a lot of chicky, the peanut chickis made with jaggery and peanuts. But if you see the label in the store-bought ones, there's always this liquid glucose added to it. So I was wondering, is it because of the shelf life that they add?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, they absolutely add pure sugar of some kind to improve the shelf life.
Okay.
Right. I mean, so the interesting thing about consumer food, right? I mean, this debate that, I just see this question about the use of chemicals in food itself, right? It's always going to be a dilemma between, can I make something really fresh and eat it right away?
Yeah.
Versus how long do I want it to last? Okay.
Yeah.
The longer you want it to last, you have to compromise on a few things, right? You can either make things last by reducing the amount of water and adding a ton of fat, which is what we do with pickles, right? Right. Or you have to make it so dry, you dry it in the sun, so there's no water, right? If there's no water, then there's no bacteria, no fungus, whatever, right? Or the third solution is what the food industry will use. Will use preservatives. It will use, which essentially prevent bacterial infections and so on. Yeah.
True. So I'm just going to put it in the oven.
So Ashok, we have a question from Shubham. Shubham, can you go ahead and ask a question?
Yeah, actually just wanted to ask that what actually makes the consistency of the batter? Does sugar help or flour help? What actually contributes more?
So the consistency of a batter actually is determined by the ratio of flour and water and fat, right? So, so if you're making like a bread, right, there's not going to be much fat. It's mostly going to be water. Flour and water is what makes that consistency. when you're making desserts, cakes, or cookies, or these kinds of things, then it'll be a combination of water, fat, and the flour. It's G3.
Okay.
All the other things don't contribute to the overall texture of the batter at all. These three are the primary ratios that you have to keep in mind.
But how does adding lipids change the texture of the batter?
So what it does is that when you're using any kind of wheat flour, the primary thing that helps it sort of rise in the oven is the fact that it's able to form gluten structures. Right? So there's two kinds of proteins, glutenin and gliadin, which in the presence of water kind of combine together to form a very stretchy thing, right? And now, if there's any kind of either a yeast or if you're adding baking powder here, anything that generates carbon dioxide, you want that carbon dioxide to be trapped inside, right? And so the only way to trap it is by something that is able to expand, that is able to stretch without breaking, right?
Okay, like a missile formation.
Right. So that's basically this entire. That's essentially how. That's why wheat is used, and you can't do this with say a non-wheat flour.
Okay.
Right? So that's the primary thing. Now, in this, water plays the role of making the gluten structure stronger. Okay. Fats play the role of making the gluten structures weaker.
Okay.
Now, since she already added milk has a ton of water anyway, right? So gluten's going to get formed. We use fats, especially when making sweeter dishes, because you don't want it to be ultra chewy like a chapati, right?
Yeah.
So we add fats. Fats actually shorten the gluten structures. In fact, that's why fat is called shortening, right? In fact, that's why it's called shortbread. In the UK, they call biscuits shortbread because they're actually shortened bread, right? So actually, fats shorten the structure, the gluten structures, right? So that's exactly what happens.
Thank you so much.
Uma and Ashok, what would be your favorite recipes from your school days? Right. So if you all remember your parents packing lunch dabbas for you all, what is it that you all always would want to go back to, or saying those were my lunch dabba memories or my tiffin box memories?
So I was always the I was studying in Delhi, so I was the South Indian kid who used to bring lunch dabbas filled with idli and things like that, right? Which I was not a fan of, but my schoolmates were an absolute fan of. So my memories are all have to do with the fact that we would swap tiffin boxes in school. I would get the aloo paratha, which I absolutely loved, and my schoolmates would get the idli, which they absolutely loved.
So might have.
Go ahead, Uma.
Yeah, please. Yeah, Ryan, you were saying something? Yeah. So no, for mine, I have plenty of lunchbox favorites. So to say them in order, I would say puri. Whenever mummy sends puri with aloo, it's a favorite. And then rasam rice with potato again, and that badams, we call it, crispies. That is another favorite. And lemon rice, that's another big favorite.
And since we are digging into memories, I would like to ask one more thing here. Chris, you look like somebody who's been experimenting a lot inside or outside the kitchen. So some of your, one of your experiment which had gone horribly wrong and turned out to be hilarious. And Uma, coming to your experiments in the kitchen, if you could also share some, something which you discovered, wow, this is how it works.
I think obviously the most hilarious sort of experiment went wrong was actually one where I was trying to bake some kind of a Lebanese style bread, right? And I was really looking forward to it to being a very, really soft and something that you could have with a side dish and so on. Except that I forgot to change the mode of the oven from the microwave to the convection oven. So I ended up microwaving that thing for about 30 minutes. And well, it turned out to be an absolute piece of rock. Also a great science lesson, right? I mean, what happens is that in a microwave, the only thing that's cooking is the water inside your food. That's all, right? So, and all that water is going to disappear if you set it in microwave mode. In a convection mode, you're actually cooking with hot air applied from the outside. That's why it's a gentler form of cooking. And you get the outside nicely browned thanks to the Maillard reaction, but the insides don't lose as much water. So it still retains that sort of softness, right? So I think, I keep explaining the science to everyone, but I ended up making the same mistake once by microwaving when I was baking bread.
So for me, experiments are part and parcel. Every day there's something happening, some consciously, some unconsciously. Now with all phones and other things, you have a lot of distractions, right? So I remember the latest, that's yesterday. So I was making this, I decided that I'll make a nice broccoli fried rice and all. I kept everything ready and kept the kadai and everything. Put the broccoli, everything is there. Bay leaf is there, the ginger garlic paste, onions are there. Everything is there. Then I put the broccoli, also blanched a nice broccoli. And rightly at that time, there was a phone call. So the gas was in sim, luckily. But then I got distracted. I came to the kitchen after, I think, around 15 to 20 minutes. I think little more than that also. And it was like a burnt, completely burnt, because I didn't add salt. At least if I had added salt, there would have been some moisture in it and it would have got saved, but I didn't add salt. This is exactly what I didn't invent. But then I continued, just removed the black parts of it, continued. And then when I served, I said, this is burnt broccoli rice. And I served it to my family, but then thankfully it was not bad, it was good. But that was definitely a disaster. Thought of something, did something.
Burnt garlic fried rice is a pretty famous thing, at least in China and others.
Yeah, but this is literally burnt, like charcoal burnt.
A little bit of surface burning. I think if you remove all the really black bits, the taste is actually quite nice. So but it's this delicate balance, right? So apparently the too much of that burnt stuff produces something called acrylamide, which is not so good for you. But just the tiny amount is a tremendous, amazing amounts of flavor.
Yeah.
So Krish and Uma, we've got two questions that have come. So I want both your views.
Sure.
One of the questions that has come up is by someone who calls themselves iPad. They haven't renamed themselves, so I'm just going to, I think they love Apple a lot. They want to know, why do we preheat the oven? The same question is from Anjana. Anjana, can you go ahead and ask your question?
Sure, sir. Hi, everyone. I have a doubt whether to use a OTG or a oven, because I recently heard that OTG is good. Can you give me an idea about it?
Sure.
Which one to use for baking?
Yeah, Ashok, you would like to?
Yeah, sure. So maybe the first one. So why do we preheat an oven? Simply because what we want is that we want your food to be in the oven at your desired temperature for that amount of time. That's really what you want. And an oven takes time to get to that temperature. So if you put your food inside and then start heating it, it will slowly bring up, and then in all that extra time, it will continue to dehydrate and cook the food imperfectly, right? So that's the reason we preheat the oven, so that you have full control over how much time your food is spending and at what temperature, right? So that's the reason we preheat. So it's always good to do that. On the OTG, and so basically an OTG is a very small sized convection oven. That's really what it is, right? It also has in addition to its oven, it has a toaster and grill feature. The only difference is that a toaster and a grill is the use of hot light. There's a bulb on top by cooking the food by radiation from that light. So that's basically what a toaster or a grill feature is. The oven part of it still works the same way, by heating air and cooking the food. So my only option to you is that I think if you have a small size kitchen and you don't want to spend 30,000 rupees on a big sized oven, and you're not someone who bakes every day, I think that OTG is a more sensible purchase, and you can do everything you can do in an oven in an OTG, except in smaller sizes. But you can make everything. You can make pizza, you can make cakes, you can bake bread in an OTG as well.
So, Uma, what do you prefer? Do you prefer an oven or an OTG? How did you start off with your cooking?
So see, the convection mode in a microwave works great. If you are having a convection mode in the oven, you have microwave oven, then it's fine. Otherwise, the oven is fine. Recently, I've even started using the air fryer. So even that I think bakes well.
Yeah. So air fryer again is an even smaller than a convection oven than an OTG. So in the sense that it saves you a lot more time but you can only make like very small bits, very specific amounts of food. So.
Yeah, in case fried food and other things also, it crisps up, which is not that texture. You don't get it in neither an OTG oven or microwave. I find that really fascinating. The air fryer also. So that is another new option, I think. And nowadays people are even baking on the stovetop, especially during the lockdown. I find that you just preheat your kadai now, kadai or your cooker, your just preheat it with little salt, and then you place for example, the same rock bun. If you don't have an oven, you can use your idli plates. Just use your idli plates, grease your idli plates, and just spoon it inside each one, and then you can use the gas stove. Just preheat your cooker and place it inside, and then you bake it for 20 minutes, and you have your rock buns. I think even that works nowadays.
We have actually seen some creative uses of people using a really old pressure cooker placed on the side, right? And then heated really, really hot. And then you can literally turn the inside like into a tandoor, right? So you can make like naans, right? So
exactly.
It's at the end of the day, the principle of an oven is hot air. That's all you need, okay? Anything else is really just about how much control you have, how precision of temperature, the duration of time, and things like that. And unless you're baking if you're baking a bread or baking a cake, some precision is required. Cookies, on the other hand, are pretty forgiving, right? I mean, you can really you can sort of, you can look and feel your way into approximating ingredients and doing that. But baking a bread or baking a cake requires otherwise a ton of precision. Right, you can't just approximate it, and you can't, undo a mistake that you made later, and so on.
Correct. With regard to preheat, I would say a simple thing like, for example, preheat is there for everything. Whether we are doing it for even say dosa, which we make, or chapati. You don't put your chapati which you have done on a cold tawa, right? You heat it only when you start seeing the fumes. Then only you put your whatever rolled out dough. Same for dosa or for your chila. You heat your tawa, it is coming to the right temperature, and then only you're pouring the batter and then spreading it. You can see the difference. You try it with the cold tawa, you try it with the right tawa. So the same thing is for baking also. You get the thing ready. You get it ready to the right temperature, then place it inside. The difference is there. See, you can always make it. You can spread your dosa also on a cold tawa, then place it on the gas. But the texture of that, the end product will be different. So that is the reason you get it ready. Just like we get ready to go out, you have to get those things ready, and then you start your cooking.
Uma, we would like to know what's been happening with the cookies which are there inside the oven right now.
So they are done. I had kept it for 3 more minutes. Thank you for reminding. I actually forgot. They are ready. They look gorgeous. Let me show you. Very hot. See, they are ready. Perfect. Let me turn and show you. It has to be like this, lightly. Can you see it's nice and brown? Here it is lightly brown, not too brown. Soft, absolutely soft. This will firm up after some time. So I'm going to transfer this to a wire rack.
So that brown color you see, that's basically food's color of magic, because that brown color happens only in the oven at a temperature of higher than 110 Celsius. Only when the temperature goes above that, a family of reactions called the Maillard reaction happens. And in fact, that quintessential smell of a baked good, right, comes from a family of molecules that are produced only at that temperature. So that's the quintessential smell of baked bread or baked cookies or a fresh baked bun. Those addictive smells, right? So they come from the Maillard reaction, right? So anyway, I think chapter 3 in my book essentially has their entire this thing on exactly this, right? You can apply this everywhere. So everywhere you want to make food more delicious, you have to make it brown. And brown happens only after 110 Celsius, which is above the boiling point of water. So you have to get rid of water, and then you have to that's why you saute your onions till they get golden brown. That's why cabbage does not taste really good unless it gets really, really dark brown. That's why puri tastes more delicious, because once it's deep fried in oil, it becomes brown. And a cookie here, or a khajur rock bun, or a bread, the exterior gets brown because of that reaction.
So they are perfectly baked and they look pretty also. So how has yours come? Whoever's baking along with me?
We have Sunil on the call, so I'm going to unmute Sunil. So Sunil also has a question, and we're also going to look at what Sunil's done.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I just wanted to ask Ashok if he could throw some light on, like the fermentation, the science of fermentation. Like our Indian diet has a lot of fermented items, like let it be dosa, let it be roti, or many other things, or kimchi or kombucha, if you pick that way. So I want to understand if he can explain quickly what is the science behind fermentation and how it helps our gut bacteria.
So absolutely. Right. So essentially fermentation is, think of fermentation.
Can I just stop you right over here?
Sure.
What I would want to do is we'll finish off the discussion regarding the rock buns that is there.
All right.
We can see Sunil's, cookies being lovely.
Yeah.
Baked over there.
Oh, wow.
It looks amazing.
Amazing.
So it's kind of, I'm just waiting for it to brown a bit. They're a little soft right now. So I would run them a bit more, like maybe 3-4 minutes more.
Yeah. If it's like this, I think it's fine. The top part will firm up, but this gives a nice crusty. There is a crusty look. Yeah.
Right.
Back to you, Ashok. Sorry for cutting you off.
Hey, no, not a problem. So fermentation essentially is a way of cooking that uses microbes instead of heat and acids, right? So you can cook food by heating it. You can cook food by using acids. You can cook food by fermentation, right? Now, historically, it's been used as a mechanism to extend the shelf life of foods. Okay, the simplest and the most basic one that mankind essentially invented was the ability to extend the shelf life of milk, because milk is notoriously perishable, in that it starts perishing, the moment it starts coming out of the cow, and you're literally it's on a ticking clock right there, right? And so obviously the way this works is that there are two kinds of microbes that we are interested in. There are millions and millions of microbes that want to eat everything that you throw at them. Most of them are poisonous and we don't want them, right? So it's about a targeted selection of some microbes that are good for us. Okay, and what happens is that as we eat them, they also enrich the gut bacteria that we have, and which therefore also helps our health. And I will sort of explain how. Right. So the two families of microbes that humanity has got interested in are lactobacteria, right? The other one is yeast, family of fungi, right? Now, lactobacteria are essentially anaerobic in the sense that they operate in an environment with less oxygen. Yeast, on the other hand, requires oxygen. So they are an aerobic form of fermentation. Now, what's actually happening is that you have the sugars would be consumed by this lactobacteria and turned into lactic acid, which is sour, right? Which is why yogurt is sour, whereas milk is not sour, right? And they eat the sugars and they generate lactic acid, and they also generate carbon dioxide, right? So which is why you do see a few bubbles in curd, but you keep it open, so all the bubbles are going to go away, right? Actually, if you try and ferment milk in a closed bottle, it will explode, because then the gas will need a place to explode to escape and so on, right? So this is essentially lacto-fermentation. Incidentally, you can lacto-ferment anything, and you can literally put carrots in a little bit of water, and you need a little bit of salt. And I'll explain why salt. Salt usually kills most living things, but lactobacteria can survive in a tiny amount of salt. And therefore, by adding salt, what you're doing is you're encouraging the lactobacteria while killing off all the other potential fungi and other things, molds and other things that may come, right? So that's why we add the salt. And then you just leave it outside for room temperature for about 4 to 5 days. You will actually, the carrot or beetroot or a cucumber or whatever it is, right, will ferment and turn sour. And that way it lasts, a much longer time, right? You can then refrigerate it to slow down the fermentation, because fermentation happens faster at room temperature, right? And then you can eat it like a pickle. It's like naturally lacto-fermented pickles, right? Because in the normal pickle you're used to is by actually adding a vinegar or a lime juice or something, a strong acid to preserve it. This is naturally generating lactic acid from the sugars in your vegetable to ferment. So that's really what this is, lacto-fermentation, right? Now, the other famous kind of fermentation is yeast fermentation, which is what happens when you bake bread or when you make alcohol, right? Because the byproduct of that fermentation reaction is alcohol when you use yeast, right? So it produces carbon dioxide and alcohol. And that's how alcoholic beverages have been made throughout history. And, sometimes you can combine both, right? So idli is a great example of both lacto fermentation as a little bit of yeast fermentation as well. In fact, it's apparently there's a 22 species of bacteria and about 4 or 5 varieties of yeast involved in making idli, right? So it's a fascinatingly complex thing. The other huge advantage is that fermentation improves the nutrition of almost everything, right? If you don't count the alcohol part of it, it improves the availability of vitamin B. It improves the availability of a lot of the proteins and essential amino acids and so on. So which is why the urad dal you would eat otherwise is not as healthy as when you eat it in idli form. And so I think, in the sense that I think the reason we seem to have lost the culture of fermentation in urban India, obviously the ubiquitous availability of refrigerators. And so people are not really used to sitting and babysitting things outside at room temperature. And also the fact that we have such a rapidly hot and humid environment. So we have to be very careful about when we're fermenting and not getting anything poisonous and so on. And also the historical problem against alcohol. So because fermentation almost always will produce alcohol somewhere. And so we've always been against that as well. And so that's why we don't have as much of a vinegar culture, except maybe in pockets of Goa and in Kerala and so on, and in some parts of Northeast India and so on. Because you can't make vinegar without first fermenting something into alcohol and then that alcohol getting fermented into vinegar, right? And so there are many of these reasons, but I think people are slowly discovering lacto-fermentation as a fantastic way to add tremendous flavor to food.
And both are good, is it? Sorry to interrupt you. Both are good. Are both good? Both with salt and what you said, the adding of yeast and then fermenting as a byproduct. So are both good for the gut equally, or
they're both very good. So remember that the yeast one will produce alcohol also.
Yeah.
Alcohol is not. I mean, in large amounts, alcohol is not a great thing. But
I have found seen my mother also, and it's in our tradition to use the old rice, right? The rice which we cook in the day. We put salt. We add salt and then some even buttermilk, and we keep it overnight. And the next day morning we have it as morning kanji, right? So that in fact we have a joke saying if you have too much of it, you're going to sleep.
So, they're not joking. It's pretty alcoholic.
Yeah.
All right. So rice is again starch. Starch, again, in the presence of yeast and bacteria, will produce alcohol. Not too much. So that's the advantage of mixing. The reason they add buttermilk is because the presence of lactobacteria will reduce the activity of the yeast so that it doesn't produce too much alcohol. So in fact, you can make homebrewed like ginger beer, right? It will not be too alcoholic at all. Just the right amount of alcohol, because you're going to be using both lacto-fermentation as well as yeast fermentation.
Right. I wanted to show this to you. Since we're talking about fermentation, this is the latest batch of lemon pickle. Just salt, just lemon, fresh turmeric, ginger, green chilies, and salt. That's it. So this has been out for around 7-8 days, and then the salt cooked all the lemons. It's gone into the refrigerator. This is the brine one with water, which you are talking about.
Yes.
This is the gooseberries.
Oh yes.
So this is the neer nellika. We say the gooseberries.
Yes.
But instead of chili powder, I added the red chilies. This is again an experiment only. I wanted to say, instead of chili powder, if I add chilies, how the taste and flavor is and how it ferments.
Yeah.
So,
and see, the raw gooseberry is so hard to eat. If you lacto ferment gooseberries, right?
Yeah.
They become so delicious.
Yeah.
Right? Because they lose so much of that sourness is replaced with a slightly more milder sourness of the lactic acid. And it's just a lot more mellower and so much more tastier. You won't believe that you're actually eating gooseberries.
Correct.
Okay.
So Uma, just coming back to you and coming back to the lovely rock bun sitting on the table over there. You could just quickly go through the entire recipe once for everyone who's on this call.
Yeah.
This
is how it is. This is how it is inside. Soft, absolutely delicious. I wish I could share this over screen with all of you who are not baking, but it's come out very well. Yeah, you were saying to go through the recipe.
If you could go through how did you put together? Some of them want to know what was your oven settings for it. So, it'll just be a quick recap for everyone.
Yeah. So I just had a bite, sorry, just to taste. It's absolutely delicious. Right, do try out. If you're not cooking today, do bake it. So the oven setting is, like I said, it's 220 degrees, 10 minutes of preheat at 220 degrees. And at the same 220 degrees, 10 to 12 minutes of baking. That's it. So 10 minutes if you want it soft on the top also. But 12 minutes, I think it will be absolutely perfect. So that is it.
Super.
So 20 minutes, your rock buns are ready.
Perfect. We've got Rupa who's got a question. She has this. Rupa, would you like to ask a question, please?
Hello, Mr. Ashok. This is Rupa. And my question is, I'm too much into saving the nutrients in the food while I cook. So I basically cook everything, on low flame or medium flame, never increase the flame. So I just want you to help me out, is there anything else, a better way to, preserve the nutrients while we cook, or something else, some other science which is active in...
Sure. So, I look, in general, while cooking a lot of these things less at low flame, etc., is a good idea from a nutrition standpoint. But in my experience, rather than look at and try and rescue every bit of nutrient from every little thing you eat, which is a much harder thing to do because of the sheer, our nutrition seems to come from the diversity of things we eat, rather than try to maximize every single thing. And in many cases, you will often find that something cooked at a slightly higher temperature actually makes more nutrients available. But there is no easy science to this, because this is all still being discovered and it's tremendously complex. So my suggestion to you is that I wouldn't break your head. Don't break your head about trying to make sure that you're rescuing every little bit of ingredient from every little thing, and rather focus on making it as tasty as you possibly can and eating as less of it as possible. So I think, it's as Michael Pollan says, the most universal nutrition advice is eat food. Food meaning that it shouldn't be something that you pour out of a packet, right? It should be something that came out of a plant or something like that, right? Eat food, mostly plants, not too much, right? All the rest of the nutrition advice is constantly changing, right? I mean, I grew up when they said no, fats are bad, but that's not. So fats are not the problem now. Carbohydrates are the problem now, right? And likewise, for example, tomatoes are a great example. Okay, carrots is another great example. Okay, people used to think that eating raw carrots as part of a salad or raw tomatoes is healthier, right? You get more nutrients that way. Well, we have finally figured out that actually cooking carrots gives you more vitamin A, more of the nutrients in carrot than eating raw carrots, right? So, but if you like the taste of raw carrots, I think that's perfectly fine. But remember that there's no universal rule that says that if I cook it less, I will actually get more nutrients. In general, I think there are other broad principles, like, for example, definitely steaming is definitely a better way to make sure that you don't waste it in the water, which you then throw away, right? So definitely steaming food is definitely sometimes better. For some vegetables, like, for example, beans, for example, apparently the science says that pressure cooking beans is the best way to get as much of the nutrition as possibly can, as opposed to simply just sauteing it in a pan, which is also fine. But you actually get more nutrition if you actually pressure cook. But that's not true for other vegetables. So the problem is that it's going to vary so tremendously that it's better to focus on diversity rather than really just on every specific ingredient out there. Hope that helps.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Super, Ashok. Uma, what has been your struggle with ensuring that your food looks good, tastes good, but is nutritious at the same time?
Ryan, my thing is to use as much fresh vegetables and fruits as possible, whichever is seasonal. Whatever is available in season, just get those vegetables and fruits and just include them in your weekly diet. It's a simple thing, but it has really helped me. So you have all the colors, you have all vegetables included, and you get a wholesome Indian meal. So that has been my, what do you say? You can say mantra, or you can say whatever technique I'm using. That's the only thing. Just go for fresh vegetables and fruits and use them in my
and as local, in the sense that as locally sourced as
Yes,
that is often a challenge in a city, but absolutely that makes a big difference. Yeah, a common misconception people often, I keep telling people that if I were to ask you that if you go to a store today and see those beautiful looking vegetables, if you're in a city, right? I'm assuming you're not in a village, right? And you see this fresh, carrot, right? Or capsicum, bright, shiny capsicum. And then you also find chopped capsicum and chopped carrots in a frozen vegetable section. And if I ask you which is fresher, people will immediately say, obviously the outside one is fresher, the frozen one is not fresh. You'd be wrong, because the frozen vegetables are fresher than the fresh vegetables, because the frozen vegetables were frozen few hours after they were plucked. And so therefore they've remained fresh as long as they were frozen. On the other hand, your so-called fresh vegetables have been sitting around, they've been moving around cars, in trucks, they've been transported from wherever it is they are grown, and they've probably been outside exposed to air for weeks and weeks before you actually eat them, right? So if freshness is about the biological activity that's happening inside that, then by all means, frozen vegetables are actually fresher than fresh vegetables.
That's interesting.
Super. I couldn't have believed that we could have such an amazing and interactive session. Uma and Ashok, both of you guys coming together, your partnership in terms of Uma, you baking the rock buns, talking about what goes into it. At the same time, you having presence of mind to bring out your fermented jars, showing us what you've been doing is amazing. Thank you so much for being on this, Zoom session with us. Ashok, you've added so much of knowledge and information to something that we do and take granted on a daily basis. Guys, these are two just amazing two books which are from the Penguin Random House collections that we've got. Uma's book on My Genius Lunchbox and Chris's Masala Lab. And I've started reading both of them. Amazing, right? The Muthia hot dog is something that I'm looking forward to. I've always wanted to eat a hot dog being a vegetarian. On top of it, I'm a Jain. So imagine a Jain trying to eat a hot dog, right? But the Muthia hot dog is my chance to, relish a hot dog. And I'm looking forward to it, Uma. Thank you so much for that. Chris, in terms of what you've written, in terms of how you explain the masalas, the mixes, those illustrations that are there in the book, just make it amazing, right? Again, Mohit Bhai, thank you so much for introducing us to both these amazing people. And for Penguin Random House for bringing them both onto this platform for us to talk to them. Me and Ryan, who's my co-founder at Tinkabola, really take this opportunity to thank both of y'all for being on this call. And we hope we get more chance to talk about food, cooking, and science.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, Darshan, if I could just add to that. So, Uma and Krish, I think it's been absolutely awesome. I only started cooking in lockdown, I must confess. So I'm very new to all this. But I had like a couple of questions while I was listening. So one was, what tips can you give for gluten-free cooking and baking? And also, what about vegan? Because I haven't consumed any dairy in about a year and a half now.
Sure.
Any pointers there?
So definitely. So gluten-free is actually quite fascinating. So in fact, as I was explaining how a lot of this baking works, and we keep explaining that baking happens only because of wheat, because of gluten in wheat, right? And so some of the advances in the last a decade or so in gluten-free baking has essentially been in the area of what we call starch binders, right? So essentially a starch binder is, so we use them, when you cook something, right? So how do you make a Chinese soup thick? You add cornstarch to water and you dunk it in, and that's going to thicken the whole thing, right? So it's basically, so what happens is when starch gets to 70 Celsius, it becomes this sort of thick goo, and it makes everything around it also thicker. And it's also the principle how you get vegetarian jellies, right? It sets, only difference is that it sets at a colder temperature as opposed to at a hotter temperature and so on. Okay, so now, except that in the context of baking, that kind of thickening effect is not enough to really bring structure to this thing. So what has happened is that we've discovered since then that there are these starch binders like xanthan gum, guar gum. Guar gum comes from guar beans, actually, right? And so on. And these are just amazing, amazing starch binders. And so a lot of gluten-free baking now uses things like xanthan gum or guar gum. So these are things that you could buy. And the tiny quarter, a teaspoon in like a kg of flour is enough to cause an amazing amount of binding. And so, especially particularly if I'm baking something like, say, a jowar roti or any kind of millet flour based rotis, which will, by the way, kind of break apart when you try and roll them, just a teaspoon of xanthan gum will make it almost as easy to make as a regular chapati. And I think it's the use of these kinds of things that I think you should look up. They are available online. You should be able to get them. And fantastic from a gluten-free baking standpoint. There's no other way to bake these otherwise.
Okay, that's great. That's great.
And vegan. See, I think for most part, I think you can replace most dairy with almond milks. And the equivalent, definitely almond milk, not necessarily soy milk. However, almond milk, unlike dairy's sort of milk, has some very curious properties, which is sort of which I'll need to look up a little bit. You'll have to add them at a very specific time, or they will end up curdling and so on.
Okay.
So there is so you just have to be careful about that. But otherwise, for most part, you can replace a combination of either almond milk or best is coconut cream, which I think for baking is a fantastic, lovely taste as well. So get really high quality Thai coconut cream. Nothing like it.
There's no power, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Sorry, we just don't have electricity here. I don't know. There's some problem with
the Christmas tree looks
I'm not
beautiful.
sure
Uma.
I was going to say the Christmas tree looks great.
Yes.
Yeah, I think they have some issue. Usually it comes off within a few seconds, but we're still waiting.
We all know you wanted to eat the buns. That's why you've switched off the light. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Darshan Bhai. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Krish, Ashok. Thank you, Uma. We've been wanting to do this in such a long time.
Yeah.
You know, the entire recipe of what we are trying to do with Ryan Bhai and Darshan Bhai is create a recipe of everybody coming together. These wonderful books thankfully give us the opportunity, the correct recipe of coming together for a reason. It was wonderful listening to both of you and see the demonstration of such great cooking happening. Thank you. Wishing you all a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. I hope the new year brings new things.
Merry Christmas to all of you.
Just, I did see one unanswered question, so maybe I could just take that.
Yeah.
So while baking bread is kneading important or the rising of the dough, actually both, except that you don't have to physically knead bread to actually strengthen the gluten structure. Just letting the bread sit in water, the flour sit in water for about, say, half an hour, the gluten structures will form themselves. And so that's called autolysis. So most bakers will normally just, that's why actually, by the way, even your grandmother will often tell you when you're kneading chapati, just add it, let it sit. And after a while, it'll become easier to knead. That's exactly what's happening, right? So unless if you don't have a strong structure, the rise won't be proper. So that's really what it is. All right.
Yeah, we got the part.
Back again. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And wish everyone Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And hope we have a fantastic 2021.
Yeah, Happy New Year, everyone. Merry Christmas. Thoroughly enjoyed today's session. Thank you all.
Yep. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you for watching this video. If you also love Conversations at a Bookstore, please do subscribe and like this channel. And if you wish to host your favorite author over a chat, do mention the same in the comment box and witness magic happen. Please also visit our website www.rajatbookcorner. This is Mohit Batra signing off.